There's something unsettling about roadside motels, isn't there? They're often isolated, surrounded by nothing but stretches of empty highway, and attract all kinds of people passing through. Maybe it's their transient nature or the fact that you never really know who's staying in the room next to you. Over the years, countless eerie stories have come out of these places, and after hearing mine, you might think twice before pulling into one late at night. This is a story of one such motel, and a night I'll never forget. My name is Otis, and this happened a few years ago during a solo road trip that I'll never forget. It was late at night, and I had been driving for hours. Exhausted, I decided to pull over at one of those cheap roadside motels you find in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small, rundown place with flickering neon lights advertising vacancies. But at that point, I didn't care about luxury. I just needed sleep. After checking in, I grabbed my bag and headed to the room. It was exactly what you'd expect, an old bed with squeaky springs, outdated wallpaper, and a faint smell of mildew. But one thing stood out. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, and I could have sworn I heard a faint dripping sound. I chalked it up to a leaky faucet, closed the door, and ignored it. I lay down, hoping to fall asleep quickly, but something felt off. The room was eerily quiet, apart from the occasional car passing on the highway. Then, I heard it. A noise coming from the bathroom. It wasn't dripping this time. It was more like faint shuffling, like someone lightly dragging their feet across the floor. My heart started racing. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just the pipes or the wind outside. But the sound didn't stop. Gathering some courage, I got up and walked toward the bathroom door. The shuffling stopped the moment I touched the doorknob. Slowly, I pushed the door open, but there was nothing there, just the empty bathroom with its stained tiles and a single, dim light bulb swaying slightly, as if it had been disturbed. I shook my head, telling myself I was just imagining things, and went back to bed. But as soon as I turned off the lights, the sounds returned, louder this time. It wasn't just shuffling. It sounded like low whispers, unintelligible but definitely there, coming from the bathroom again. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and decided I'd sleep in my car if I had to. But as I opened the door to leave, I froze. There, on the bathroom mirror, was a single handprint, too large to be mine and smeared with something dark. I didn't even stop to think. I grabbed my bag and bolted to my car. I didn't look back, and I didn't sleep until I was miles away from that motel. To this day, I don't know what was in that bathroom, and honestly, I never want to find out. My name is Chase, and this happened about a year ago during a solo road trip to visit some friends in another city. It was supposed to be a smooth journey, but an unexpected storm completely changed the course of that night. The rain was so heavy I could barely see the road. My car was almost skidding on the curves when I saw the glowing sign of a small roadside motel. I decided it wasn't worth the risk to keep driving and pulled over to spend the night there. The place was basic, but it looked decent enough. I went into the office to check in, and that's when things started to feel off. The owner was a middle-aged man with a fixed stare and a smile that felt just a little too forced. He asked the usual questions about how many nights I'd be staying, but then started asking more personal questions, where I was coming from, why I was traveling alone, and if anyone knew I was there. I kept my answers short, trying to brush it off, but the uneasiness was growing. He handed me the key and directed me to a room at the end of the hallway. When I got there, it was what I expected, stained walls, an old bed, but it seemed clean enough. The sound of the rain hitting the window was almost soothing, but I couldn't shake off the odd vibe from the owner. I was almost asleep when I heard a knock on the door. Looking through the peephole, it was him. I cracked the door open, and he was holding a tray with a steaming cup of coffee. He said he'd made it for me since he thought I might want something warm because of the storm. I politely declined and said I was fine. He insisted. He said the coffee was special, something he'd made himself, and that I should really try it. That's when his tone changed. When I declined a second time, he became visibly annoyed. He said something like, "I made this with good intentions, and you should accept it. It would be insulting not to." He moved closer to the door, staring at me with intensity, almost forcing the cup into my hands. My heart was racing. I told him again that I didn't need it and shut the door. But he stayed there, knocking and saying I had to try the coffee. It was terrifying. I grabbed my backpack and whatever I had with me, deciding it was better to leave, even with the storm raging outside. When I opened the door to leave, he was still standing in the hallway, holding the cup, staring at me. I walked past him without saying a word. He didn't move, just watched as I rushed to my car. I drove for hours in that storm, but I felt relieved to have left that place. To this day, I wonder what was in that coffee and why he was so desperate for me to drink it. Honestly, I hope I never find out. My name is Liam, and this story happened a few months ago during a long road trip. I was exhausted after driving for hours and decided to pull into a small roadside motel to rest. It was one of those places that looked decent enough from the outside but felt slightly eerie once you were inside. I tried not to think too much about it. After all, I just needed a place to sleep. When I checked in, the receptionist barely looked at me and mumbled something about my room being at the far end of the corridor. I grabbed my key and went straight there, just wanting to crash for the night. But as I was walking to my room, I heard something odd coming from one of the other rooms. The door to this particular room was shut tight, but I could hear a low, rhythmic chant in a language I didn't recognize. It wasn't like any language I'd ever heard before. Something about it sounded ancient, almost guttural. I slowed my pace, trying to listen more carefully, but then shook it off. I told myself it was none of my business and kept walking to my room. A couple of hours later, after I'd settled in, I realized I'd left my phone charger in the car. It was already past midnight, and the motel was eerily quiet. I tried to convince myself to leave it until the morning, but I knew my phone wouldn't last that long. So, reluctantly, I grabbed my key and stepped out into the hallway. As I walked back toward the parking lot, I had to pass that same room again. This time, the door was slightly ajar. I tried not to look, but curiosity got the better of me. I glanced inside as I passed, and what I saw made my stomach drop. The room was dimly lit by dozens of flickering candles arranged in a circle, and in the center of the floor was what looked like a pentagram. Before I could fully process what I was seeing, one of the people inside noticed me. Their eyes met mine for just a moment before they quickly stood up and slammed the door shut. My heart was pounding as I hurried to my car, grabbed my charger, and rushed back to my room. I locked the door behind me, double-checked the window locks, and tried to convince myself that I'd just imagined it all. But not long after, there was a knock at my door. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate, 3 slow, steady knocks. I froze, not daring to make a sound. The knocking came again, this time slightly louder. I didn't open the door. I didn't even move. I just sat there, holding my breath, waiting for whoever it was to go away. Eventually, the knocking stopped, but I barely slept that night. As soon as the sun came up, I packed my things and left the motel without even checking out. Whatever was going on in that room, I wanted no part of it. I've stayed in plenty of motels since then, but I always make sure to avoid places that seem even the slightest bit off. Roadside motels may seem like a convenient stop during a long journey, but as these stories prove, they can also be the setting for some of the most unsettling experiences. Whether it's strange noises, odd encounters, or something far more sinister, you never really know what you're walking into. So next time you're traveling late at night, think twice before pulling into that isolated motel off the highway. Stay safe, and as always, thank you for listening.